Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And hello and welcome or welcome back. I am Peter Robbins and the show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. And just for the sake of historic accuracy, we are broadcasting on June 24th, 2025. June 23rd, tomorrow being the 24th, which is the anniversary of the very significant Kenneth Arnold UFO sightings and arguably the day assigned to the birth of the modern age of UFO sightings and International UFO Day. So start planning now on how you are going to celebrate. No monologue tonight. Our guest is an old friend and somebody with an extraordinary background, and I wanted to just get right into it. Nancy Tertre is a successful businesswoman, an attorney specializing in securities litigation, corporate work, an environmental activist, and an inveterate world traveler. She graduated magna cum laude from Princeton University, then graduated from honors from Pace University Law School. She was a published member of the Law Review and editor of the law school newspaper. She is the former host and creator of CBS radio shows Hot Leads, Cold Cases, which ran for 4 years and involved hundreds of in-depth interviews with distinguished professionals in fields such as remote viewing, psychic detectives, neuroscientists, astrobiologists, physicists, mind control experts, and more. Her monthly blog is focused on psychic-related issues. Tertre is the author of several highly researched books, among them Behind Criminal Minds, the memoirs of a retired New York City homicide detective, which she co-authored. Psychic Intuition, Everything You Ever Wanted to Ask but Were Afraid to Know, and How to Talk to an Alien, a comparative linguistic analysis of various alleged types of alien speech patterns and written languages, and analysis of case studies. A major part of Nancy's background and training is rooted in the discipline of remote viewing. Her mentor was the legendary Ingo Swann, arguably the father of this remarkable technique. They first met in 2003 and remained close until Swann's death in 2013. Nancy was actually trained in advanced controlled remote viewing by Sergeant First Class U.S. Army retired Lynn Buchanan, who worked in the Army's Stargate program at Fort Meade, Maryland, and who runs the remote viewing group PSI. She was trained in associative remote viewing with physicist Marty Rosenblatt, who runs the Applied Precognitive Project, APP, and trained in extended remote viewing with Angela Thompson Smith, co-founder of the International Remote Viewing Association and head of MindWise Consulting. Tertre herself developed a new type of remote viewing that we will be talking about later. She has also been interviewed on hundreds of internet, broadcast radio, and television shows on topics ranging from psychic intuition, remote viewing, paranormal activity, and ufology. She was a hired psychic reader at the French Embassy in New York City and was the 11th subject to experience the octopus, which we'll also be discussing during the second half of the show. Most recently, Nancy has been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals for her work on the relationship between physics and autistics. She is launching a new remote viewing program for people on the autistic spectrum, now 3 years in development. Nancy is working with a British screenplay writer on creating a streaming TV series regarding paranormal activities and science. And she has just begun working with a publisher on her new book about her experience in Russia, training in psychoanalysis kinesis. Nancy's website is theskepticalpsychic.com. I'm exhausted. Nancy Tertre, welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth, my friend.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate actually listening to that. I'm saying, did I do that? I don't even remember. Some of this stuff is like, I think I'm just getting old.
Not you, no. It is a remarkable life that you are in the process of living. And one of the things we first connected on was a great love of travel. And the wilder the corner of the earth, the better. The least explored, the more exciting. And I think it's a thread, well, it helps keep somebody young, knowing that new adventures are always around the corner, always possibly so. And I wanted to just start at the beginning. Can you tell us where you were born and a bit about your rather remarkable family?
I don't know what you mean by remarkable family. I didn't think they were that remarkable, but yeah, I was born in New Haven. I was, somebody asked me not that long ago, so where were you born? I said, well, because this was in New Haven where I was talking to this person. And I said, well, I was conceived at Yale Medical School. And so I was born in New Haven. Let me put it that way. I don't know what you mean by what do you mean anyway?
Is it the family name? Is this something you can trace back in French history? It always intrigues me when people can go back in time, with their family lineage. And is that the case with your family?
Okay, so now you're technically talking about my husband's family. And yes, they actually, we've got a copy of the family genealogy that they've traced back 1,000 years. And he comes from the second oldest family in France. So they've been around forever. And as he's very happy to tell people, he's related to, if you go back far enough, essentially every king of every country on the planet. Because, they all got together, so that was inevitable.
Okay. That was my point of confusion, your husband's family. Well, yeah. That's impressive. Geez. I'm sure they haven't left out any kings or queens in there. I think you might want to double check.
They did Europe, Asia, the Middle East. I mean, they were pretty much like all over the place. So no, I don't think they left anybody out. No.
You are living a life in two very distinct areas of what I'll laughingly call reality. You're a practicing attorney. You're a businesswoman. You are living very much in the real world. No airy-fairy nonsense. And you also have worked with police departments to help them in crimes using remote viewing. And I want to know kind of where it began. But first of all, did you think originally you were going to become an attorney, or something else captured your imagination first?
No, I actually didn't think I would ever be good enough to be an attorney. I never in a million years thought that I could even, pass the various tests that you need to take in order to get into law school, in order to get out of law school, in order to pass the bar and that kind of thing. I ended up, weirdly, I did actually really well. I did great, which was a surprise to me. But so I never had plans to be an attorney. In fact, when I was, I just reconnected yesterday with a friend of mine. When I was 15, 16 years old, I was sort of a singer-songwriter, and I used to perform at local places around the Boston area. And eventually, I started playing with two high school friends. They were both a year ahead of me in high school, One of them played a 6-string guitar, the other played the 12-string, and they were fabulous. And we did stuff on the radio, things like that. I really wanted to be somebody creative. I did a lot of writing. I wrote my first book when I was 7 years old. My elementary school, like 6th grade teacher, when we all said, goodbye, we were all moving on to middle school. She said, well, Nancy, come back to me when you're a famous artist because I'm good at drawing stuff. And so I was good at writing, drawing, and then, music. I was involved in all aspects of music for over 20 years. And so I wanted to be whatever it was going to be, some type of an artist, a musician, a writer, something creative. Yeah. And that's not really where my not terribly remarkable side of the family wanted me to go. They wanted me, just get into a good school and do really well, get straight A's, and then maybe
you can enjoy your singing on the side.
That's what I was told. That's exactly what I was told. So my life has been a weird. It's like a patchwork quilt. I mean, it just makes no sense at all. But the one thing that I tell my kids is, now that I'm old, life is cyclical. Everything that you ever do will come full circle. And every time you come full circle, where even if you think you've strayed way off of it, you come back with this new body of knowledge and experience that you can apply to what you used to know, and you get even better at it.
One of my favorite examples of what you just said is reading a really outstanding book in high school and then rereading it 10, 20, 30 years later.
Yeah.
You can judge a great deal by the difference in your reactions, what you get, how deep it sinks. Nancy, did you have any experience as a young person that we might classify as psychic, paranormal, unusual, UFO related, or did that come later?
In my rather unremarkable family early life, no, I didn't have any of those skills, nor did anybody in my family on either side, going all the way back to as far as anybody could figure. So no, there was nothing. I think that I had a couple of uncles who I found out later had both seen, I guess, UFOs probably in the 1950s, and they were both in New Hampshire, which is kind of interesting, given sort of the origin of, that. I never saw any. Nobody in my family did. I was not psychic, although I was just telling somebody today, I had two little sort of very personal sort of premonitions, I guess, about myself, which I don't know what age it had to have been. I don't know, maybe age 12, 11. I don't know why I had them. I don't know why I was thinking them, but one's already come to pass, and the other, somebody will be able to figure out, because I figure I'm going to live a long life and die of a chronic disease. So far, so good. Okay. And I won't be around to really figure that one out. Somebody else had to figure whether that was, I know that, who was it? Wolfgang Pauli, I think, was able to predict the room, the hospital room, I think, and the date that he died. I think Tesla may have also done some predicting on the date of his death. So I know that, and there are other people who've done that, famous people. So I think it can be done, and I think ultimately we all kind of know. So it wouldn't surprise me. I'll put it that way.
The pictures that you sent me are quite wonderful, and let's catch up a bit with a few of them.
Oh, yeah.
Is that your grandfather?
Yeah, that was my Swedish grandfather. His name was, well, we all called him Puff. But yeah, that was Puff. He actually showed up in a dream, a lucid dream that I had. I probably told you about it. And this would have been, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago. And he saved my eyesight because he essentially showed me a book of ophthalmology, told me to read it. And I said, look, Puff, I can't read. I'm in a dream. And he said, okay, look at the diagram. It was a medical drawing illustration of the interior of the eyeball. And he said, go get your eyes checked. And I said, well, I don't need to, because I hadn't had any problems with my eyes and my vision was fine. Long story short, on a whim, when I woke up, I decided, well, what the heck, I'll go in for my annual whatever. And the ophthalmologist told me for the first time in my life, he said, well, you have glaucoma and you'll be seeing me every 3 months for the rest of your life and taking medication for the rest of your life in your eyes. And sure enough. So my grandfather showed up and showed that Puff. He saved my eyesight.
I inherited my glaucoma from my dad, nothing otherworldly about it, but eye drops every night and every morning, and I expect to see straight through until I'm not even here anymore.
Yeah.
It's such a manageable condition. And, if it was 100 years ago, we would simply be blind or going blind and trying to compensate with our other senses, I guess.
Yeah, you got to catch it early. That's the key.
Well, is this a Swedish child that we are looking at?
Yes, my mother used to dress me up in little Swedish outfit, and that actually was at my grandparents', Puff, and it was at their house up in New Hampshire.
Lovely.
That's me. That's me doing one of my elephant calls at a talent night at Princeton.
Now, let's hold right there for a moment. That deductively might mean that you had experience with elephants before you entered Princeton University. Am I correct?
Not that I remember. I was just always able to do a really good elephant call.
Outstanding. No wonder you graduated cum laude.
Right, there you go.
This is not at Princeton.
No, that was many, many, many decades ago when my ex and I went down the Amazon when nobody was doing that. I mean, really nobody. We went down and met with various tribes down there. And these are some of the kids. There was quite an amazing experience.
Wow.
That's the ex.
Yep.
That's I hate to think. I mean, I know that I won't say which one, but there's some well-known people in that picture. That was also at the talent show.
And that look is worth $1 million. That is just a wonderful. Whoa.
Yeah. Oh, and that was when I went down the Amazon. You're jumping back and forth here, but that was these guys decided to show, it was a handful of us, like maybe 6 tourists who'd gone way down the Amazon together, and they decided to show us how their blowpipes worked with the real curare tips, and they had a little target thing set up. And the stupid, the tourists who were, our group, none of them were paying attention to these guys. And these guys were missing them by, a few, probably a foot. And the tourists had no idea. And these guys thought it was absolutely hilarious that, these idiot tourists hadn't figured out that they had just missed death by,
Well, it would have happened fairly quickly, I guess. But
yeah. Oh, no. I can't believe I sent you that. Uh, okay.
Princeton graduation.
Yeah. Yes, no
Hey, but
comment on
come
that
on. That
one.
is something to be very proud of, to graduate cum laude, and especially from Princeton. That's something to always be proud of.
Yeah, thank you. I am proud of it. This one here, I lived in France for a year when I was in college, and then I ended up for about a half a year. I worked for an Austrian royal family, and they had many castles, and that was one of them that was in northern Germany. So I lived there in the castle.
What did you do for them?
Well, they had, I think it was 5 little princes. And my job, I was never quite sure what my job was. I wasn't quite the help, but sort of. I mean, my job was sort of to. They had a nanny, they had cooks, they even had their own castle or family historian. They had chauffeurs, they had, I mean, you name it, gardeners. Um, they didn't need me. I think I was there just for the prestige of being able to say they had an American girl working for them. I would sort of entertain the kids. I mean, I would go for walks or talk to them, or I don't even remember.
How wonderful.
Yeah, and that was the princess there, the Austrian princess with one of her kids, and that's sort of an overlap of me there in the background.
I was going to say, it is a haunting looking photograph with a translucent princess.
Yeah, and it's funny because I checked on them recently, and I believe that the eldest son, I think he was about 13 when I was there, and he's now, I think, she's long gone. Her husband is gone, and I think he's now running the castle and the family. That's my daughter and my son when we were living in Manhattan.
What a wonderful photo.
Yeah, I like that photo. They're such good kids. That I just happen to love this photo. I went on a vacation, so I was there. I was like, I'm going to say maybe 36.
Where was there?
Oh, there was in Senegal, and I wanted to prove to myself that I could book myself on a little vacation. And I went and met a friend of mine who was already there, and we hung out with this guy here. His name was Olivier, and he was a musician, and we hung out with musicians, and everybody was living on the beach, so it was just really nice. And a bunch of his friends actually made me some African instruments, which I still have today. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And that's yeah, that was a while ago. So that's me with my husband, my lovely husband, Patrick.
Yeah, and we can see St. Lucia and 1990.
Yeah, I think that might have been. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think that was probably St. Lucia was. I think that was our first vacation together. And that's me in Thailand. That was probably around 1990-ish.
Mm.
Same. Oh yeah, there's an elephant.
Yeah.
I can communicate well with. I love elephants.
Yeah.
I love them.
They are some of the most remarkable creatures, and a lot more worthy of our respect than a good number of our fellow human beings.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, more Thailand.
It's so special to see so much public art as we do see in quite a number of Asian countries. Oh.
Some of my friends, some of my classmates.
That's a lovely shot.
And oh yeah, I like that one. That's me with a snake.
Oh yes, I hadn't even noticed, but there, now that you mention it, how could anybody not notice?
Yeah, exactly.
and you and the snake are on something of a sea cruise.
Yeah, seem to be floating around. I think it was in, because they have that, I think it's in Bangkok. They have this incredible floating market there. Where, if you're a customer or if you're a vendor, you're just floating by in a boat like that.
I've seen photos of the market. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Patrick looking very sharp.
Yeah, he's been running a bunch of organizations because he's a French military reserve officer.
Yeah.
My kids, we had the best of the best. That's Manhattan. That was our. It was
dying.
The terrace up there was bigger than the size of my entire previous apartment in Manhattan.
Oh my gosh! What address roughly were you at?
It was right across the street from Gracie Mansion. So right
oh my god! So 90s. Oh my gosh, that's amazing! Wow, way to go! If you're going to live in the city, this is the way to do it.
Oh, totally. I mean, we had our own, vegetable garden. You don't see it. You don't see the dining area.
Oh my gosh!
We had a full-size bar there. It's incredible.
That's outstanding.
And that was, my son William, who, by the way, did become, he's 26 now. He did become a volunteer firefighter when he was in high school. That's what he did. So he followed through on that.
Bravo. And he looks great in his uniform.
And
okay. Now let's talk about this film shoot.
Yeah, that was Spielberg's film shoot. That's my daughter, Celine. She was a child actress at one point, which was pretty funny. She only had 2 directors in her life. One was Steven Spielberg. The other was Clint Eastwood. And, and not too shabby.
Bummer. Wow, what a resume. This was, of course, a historic miniseries. 5 episodes. No, wait.
No, I think it was
10 episodes of 2 hours each, I think. I mean, it was the longest miniseries made at the time. And I thought at times a masterpiece with a total Spielbergian touch, at other times a miniseries that was clever, but at its best, it was jaw-dropping. And now that I know, or I'm reminded that Celine was in it, I'm now going to try to find her in my next go-round when I watch again.
No, because you won't see her. Those are her body doubles there. Oh. She shot there for over a month. The director, all of the producers, the executive producers, everybody loved her. They sent the dailies down to Spielberg. He loved her. He had handpicked her. And then her nemesis, Dakota Fanning, Dakota's agent called up Spielberg one day and said, well, Dakota's movie deal has fallen through. So, she'd be available to do your series. So that's what happened. So what Spielberg did as sort of compensation, I guess, was to put her into his next movie after that, which was called Catch Me If You Can, which turned out to be a fabulous movie. Yeah.
How wonderful.
She played opposite Leonardo DiCaprio very briefly in that movie, but at least she's in there. And she says her real name. Which and the sound guys were telling me, and they said, they told me she put her name. Spielberg did not cut it out; he kept it in. So yeah,
that's great. Let us talk about this.
Okay. That was our birth announcement for our son. That was my idea. I don't know why I did that, because I was not at all into UFOs or aliens, ETs, whatever. I don't know why I did that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And you another shot from the shoot.
Yeah.
And come full circle again.
Yeah, so that's Celine she actually had a professional career for a while doing singer-songwriter. She was touring in Europe, and she had invited me to come and play flute on some of her songs there. So that's what we did. That was in Brooklyn at
Oh,
some concert she was doing.
outstanding.
That was when yeah, that's me and her
Oh
standing.
boy.
That was up in Vancouver during the Spielberg thing.
Yeah.
Ah, interesting.
And I
Yeah.
have to tell you, you are, of course, deeply involved and have been for many years in the world of remote viewing. And it wasn't, well, there was a time that I was not only not aware of remote viewing, and of course, we're looking at a picture here of Ingo Swann, who, as you note, is literally the father of this extraordinary discipline technique that is really changing the world in a quiet way. In 1998, I came to work one day working for Bud Hopkins in a studio, and I got there early. And like a lot of authors, um, people who are fans, respect your work, want you to know that they're out there, people would send him books unrequested, often, with best wishes or whatever. And they fell into two categories: interesting books that he read and sometimes kept, and other books that ran the gamut, as you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
And one day I come in and there's a book on his desk, and I look at the cover and I just laugh, because it's obviously, I don't even have to open it to know it's a goofball kind of book. The cover, illustration, the title, the name of the author, I had never heard of any of them, and they just struck me as quite lighthearted. Bud came in about 20 minutes later, and I made a joke about the book. And he said, have you ever heard of remote viewing? I said, no. He said, read this book. And I read Penetration by Ingo Swann. This is 1998. And I will never get over that cover. It is so what it is. Also, of course, I knew nobody has a real name like Ingo Swann. Just come on. The title, the illustration, and of course, I was completely humbled, and it was life-changing. I simply didn't know about this. And again, as we move forward in the show, we'll talk about this more. At what point in your life, Nancy, did you first hear about this technique, this thing called remote viewing, and what was your first take on it when you heard about it?
Well, I'm trying to think well, no, the first time I ever heard about it was from Ingo. I mean, so he was the first person he was the first remote viewer I ever knew. And yeah.
How did you meet him?
That's a really good question. So I don't know why I got stuck on wanting to meet him. And it turned out that he was sort of a, what do you call somebody sort of a recluse, sort of a hermit. He just, and he did not, he'd done his career and his stuff with the government, and he was kind of done with that and he was not that interested in fame and stuff. He just could care less at that point. So he completely unlisted. You couldn't find him anywhere. I had a vague knowledge that he was in Manhattan or somewhere in New York, but I couldn't find him. So I found somebody I'd been talking to was a fellow named the Amazing Kreskin, who was very famous. And I just discovered, sadly, he just passed away not that long ago, I think a couple of years ago. But he said that he had a friend who, and of course, now I can't remember his name, but the guy was about 104 years old at the time, but knew everybody who had been involved in psychic research. And he said, the amazing Kreskin said he'd ask him, and he said, yeah. And I got Ingo's address or whatever. And
he lived downtown, right? He had a loft on the Bowery.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I have several other friends who were also good friends of Ingo's, and they described him at this point in your life that you are describing him just as you are. Again, not a recluse, but he had done his thing, and he was home to be called on occasionally if, he wanted to see you. I am so sorry I never got to meet him. That book still stays with me. And for anyone who, after this show, and if you go to Nancy's website, there's a whole collection of information to access, but it does really begin with Ingo, unless there's somebody before him quietly tucked away in the history of remote viewing. He is the true pioneer. Do you remember what it was that drew you to his work? At that point, were you involved in other psychic phenomena, or did you have your radio show yet?
No.
What triggered the deepening interest in remote viewing to the point where you have become so involved and such an authority on the subject?
Don't know that I'm an authority, but I've been in the biz for a while now. But no, I was that was a point in my life. I didn't believe in any of this stuff. I didn't believe in psychic stuff, paranormal stuff. Certainly the business with UFOs and ETs, I figured that's, now you've been in that, like you got early on into that. As far as I was concerned, that was just sort of a crock. I had zero interest because I just didn't believe it. You have to understand, I had no experience really with any of this stuff. So what I was doing is I was trying to write a book that I thought was going to be the psychology of intuition. So I was looking for people who could tell me how intuition worked. And I was running up against roadblocks in psychiatry, psychology, neuroscience, all of the sciences. They were not interested. Now they've gotten significantly more interested now that they've got the use of scans and that kind of thing. But back then, no, they couldn't care less. So I had no choice but to sort of seek out these allegedly very psychic individuals, and I'd heard about them. And so I found them. And, we stayed very friendly for 10 years.
Your work with law enforcement personnel, how did you come to write the book or co-author the book Behind Criminal Minds, which again is the memoirs of a retired New York City homicide detective? Yeah,
that was, first of all, it was a co-write. So, I don't take credit for the book, and essentially, was his life, but that was not at all connected to the work that I eventually did as a psychic detective. That was, I believe, if I'm remembering that right, that was before then.
Okay.
Simply, he was a friend of mine. He was a former New York City homicide detective, and he'd lived a pretty wild life. And so I got to help him write down the stories of the really crazy stuff that went down in New York City.
How bad?
Yeah.
The psychic intuition, I think we human beings overall tend to mystify what we don't understand, and sometimes mechanize things that are more poetic. When I say mysticize what we don't understand, we will give any number of airy-fairy possibilities, but in fact, so much of what appears to be magic on the surface is subject to laws of physics of some sort that are probably just as real as water boiling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. It's just that we haven't established the laws that govern it yet.
Mm.
At a certain point, you started to work with detectives in different police departments around the country in criminal investigation. How did you get to that point? And did you reach out to particular people in law enforcement or police departments, or did they reach out to you?
First of all, I was apprenticed to a very well-known psychic detective, Nancy Orlean Weber, for 10 years.
Oh.
So in the course of doing that, I mean, I was working with her and then ended up working on, after that, doing this kind of work. People, they usually, I just don't have it in me really to be an ambulance chaser. So, and for better or for worse, I sort of sit around and wait for people to get in touch with me, which they did. So I would, and that was really interesting to me. A lot of psychics won't go into that line of work because they just find it too, gruesome or horrible, or it disturbs their delicate sensibilities, which of course I understand. But the way I was looking at it, I was enjoying those kinds of cases because I could look at it like a puzzle. I'm trying to solve issues. And even, I watch tons of these, they got shows on TV about, criminal investigations and crimes and things like that. I watch those and I'm using my psychic abilities to try and identify who did what. So I like that. And on top of that, I figure I was doing a service not only to the living of whoever the victims were, and they were usually homicide victims, but also to the actual victims in spirit.
Yes, that makes sense to me. Were you using remote viewing techniques to help solve these questions and locate, in some cases, individuals, or was this detective work, did it predate your involvement in remote viewing?
That predated my involvement, and I wouldn't call that remote viewing. That was pure clairvoyant work. When you're doing remote viewing, the whole difference is, I call remote viewing, I call it clairvoyance with protocols, and it's the protocols that makes the difference, because you're documenting, before you know anything. You are then getting, you're scoring on confirmations versus your disconfirmations of the actual data, and you judge your reading on that. When you're doing clairvoyant work, you could be picking up, any types of clues from anywhere and not factor them in to how you arrived at a particular psychic or so-called psychic answer.
Nancy, for folks who have never had these kind of experiences or never explored their potential in these areas, is it, how can I say, do you think that this is something that simply these skills lie dormant in all of us to one degree or another, or some people are just born with more of a gift and an ability and a willingness to explore it?
All of the above. I just had that conversation with a friend of mine today. She was saying, well, don't you think that some people are just born, better at doing this stuff? And I said, absolutely, yes, I agree with that. So I do think there are genetic components. I think it all has to do with the way that that our brains approach analyzing mostly sensory data, and our brains operate differently. And then on top of that, it's that nature versus nurture thing. If you grow up in a family like the one I grew up in, none of this stuff exists. It's um, it doesn't exist. So then if it doesn't exist for your family and you're told that it cannot exist for you, it will not exist because that's how the brain works with memory and creating new memories and new experiences.
It's so interesting to me. Off on a tangent, but years ago when I was on the faculty of the School of Visual Arts in their School of Continuing Education, night school, I had many successful professionals in the room, and I began each class with small private meetings with each one, and it didn't matter the level of success that they had as adults, and some were very much so. Every one of them had a variation on the story of when I was 7 or 3 years old or 9, I was drawing a turtle and my cousin came up behind me and said, "That's the worst looking dog I've ever seen." And it hurt my feelings and I never drew again. And I'd like to start. But they just accepted that programming, so to say, in one sentence. We're down about it. And, why embarrass yourself by going up against it? It can be that simple sometimes, as you know. And it's almost miraculous when people realize that, really, I can just set this aside and move on, or, explore this unencumbered by the past.
I
Yeah,
was
please.
the book The Little Prince?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So, and in fact, my husband was just honored with a group of other people being able to put a statue up in front of the French consulate, I believe, in New York City, of the Little Prince. But anyway, The Little Prince, if you remember, this is what made him great, was he did a drawing. And it was a very simple little line drawing. And it had a big hump and these 2 long skinny ends. And he said he showed it to the adults and they all said, "Oh, that's a very nice hat, like a fedora." He said, "No, it's not a fedora. That's a snake that ate an elephant." And so he didn't buy into the adult viewpoint, which is why that book is what it is.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Did you have a experience or series of what we'll call psychic experiences that drew you into developing this facility, or was it something that you heard about, and just began to objectively get involved in, analytically, so to say?
No, I had no psychic friends. I didn't know any psychics until I started to work on my book about the psychology of intuition. I had one, I may have told you about this, one experience where it was a full-blown, flat-out mediumship thing in the middle of a group of psychotherapists that were doing training. Whoa. And I was the only non-psychotherapist who was doing this, and I was horrified that I was coming up with the most, I sounded foolish beyond belief to myself, but turned out it was all very accurate. Other than that was the most dramatic, but what do you do with that? I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't even know what that was. So I, did what most people do, is I put it stuffed in that little drawer of let's forget that, and moved on. So yeah, no, I didn't have I had nothing. I'm just trained.
The reality of remote viewing in its simplest form defies all logic and reason, in that, and correct me if I'm giving an unreliable or a poor example, that you are in some cases given an envelope with an image inside. It's not an envelope you can hold up to the light and look through. That image is in there. And via the techniques you learn in remote viewing, you in many cases, get a fairly clear picture, in some cases, a shockingly clear picture, even if you're not sure what it's a picture of, which you set down and then compare it to the original drawing in the envelope. Is that a fair basic characterization of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's sort of the sort of primary concept of what a remote viewing procedure looks like. But yeah, you get a so-called blind target or a partially blind target, and you were given a piece of paper, a pencil or a pen, and you just start writing down impressions. Depending on the type of remote viewing you're doing, you're writing down different types of data, okay? So the documentation angle is different. But you're still, once you write it down, then if you're lucky enough to get some feedback on it, which hopefully you do in training, which is kind of the, what you're talking about, they use that in training, you do get feedback. And then you find out, well, how much of what you actually wrote down or sketched or whatever that you did accurately or not.
You understand, of course, that for somebody who is listening to this and hearing about remote viewing for the first time, this is impossible according to all the laws of physics, the natural world. It can't be because it's impossible. For me, the debunker's mantra is it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else, and let me tap you on the head and explain it to you. Except that there's no way to debunk the results that have been logged in by very credible individuals in the work in ways that we can access them that show that it's absolutely true. Do you remember when you first started and maybe felt, I feel a little silly here, and look at this, my drawing isn't anything like that, I maybe this isn't for me? Or did you just take to it and get it, and images started to reinforce themselves?
That's actually a complicated question.
Is it something that, like any discipline, that the more you practice, the better you have the potential of becoming?
Yeah, there are all kinds of debates about that. I think it's sort of the classic view in the remote viewing field is that, well, you don't really get better. So either you got it or you don't. There are a lot of people who have taken that point of view. I don't know that I agree with that, because I started out with nothing really. I mean, maybe I had some sensitivities that helped me out. I don't know. But I know, and I think I'm sort of more the exception to the rule in all of these things. I'm just trained. The only things I am not trained in, essentially, are medical intuitive and energy healing. But all the other stuff, yeah, I'm essentially trained in it, which means if I can do it, I know that it is trainable. Okay. Now, do you get better at it? I kind of disagree with the people in the industry who say, well, no, you never really get better. So, you may get, but everybody reaches like a plateau phase. Maybe generally speaking, that's true. But I know I can do stuff today that absolutely I could not do, 15 years ago. I mean, and speaking of, knowing that it's impossible, I have now learned it's better if you allow yourself the ability to do the impossible. That's our permission level in our brain.
Yeah.
If you don't acknowledge that you can do the impossible, frequently you will not do the impossible. Okay. And it's all about consciousness and how deeply we can reach into our perceptions of what is real and what is not. I do a type of remote viewing now, and I you mentioned this earlier. I mean, I created a type of remote viewing called TSP.
And hold that thought for a moment because we have just burned through our first hour.
Wow.
Peter Robbins here, special guest Nancy Tertre, and we will be back in 5 minutes. Don't go away.
The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from Unex Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to research a haunted house can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unexmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unexmedia.com or amazon.com.
If you want something fun to do with the family this summer, listen up. It's the ultimate celebration of the iconic sci-fi universes that have captured people's imaginations for generations. And it's taking place in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Special guests including NASA astronaut, Disney artist, YouTube content creator, and characters from the Star Wars universe, also robots and world-class model builders. The Space Museum and Grissom Center in Bonne Terre presents its latest installment of Show Me Space 2025 with Show Me Sci-Fi Space on Saturday, June 28 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. The Space Museum and Grissom Center is located at 118 East School Street in Bonne Terre. Call 573-358-1200 or visit space-mo.org. That's space.
The Unex Network presents a health and wellness spiritually based brand of hemp-derived CBD products made by Hopewell Farm in Harrogate, Tennessee. We apply our Cathara energy work with all of our plants and products. Our products made in small batches with only 2 ingredients of pure hemp, full spectrum crude oil, and coconut-derived MCT oil. Third-party lab tested for potency and legal THC levels with 6 strengths of 1 ounce oil to choose from. Know what you're buying and get what you pay for from Hopewell Farm. Applied directly to a specific area, Hopewell Farm topical salve in 1 ounce and ½ ounce sizes made with pure hemp crude oil, comfrey extract, and all natural ingredients. Find the Hopewell Farm link and coupon code on the Unex Network website at unexnetwork.com. That's unexnetwork.com.
And we are back. Peter Robbins here with my special guest, Nancy Tertre. And welcome back, Nancy.
Thank you.
I discussed in passing at the beginning that you have developed a specific remote viewing technique that you call TSP. Before you discuss that, is there anything else you feel we should know about basic remote viewing to set it aside, set it off from what the technique that you have developed?
Yeah, I just wanted to address what you were talking about, which is people are astonished when this stuff actually works because it is, as you suggest, at least in our world framework, it is literally impossible to do this. And yet people do it over and over and over and over again. And what's wonderful about remote viewing is it's not just this, psychic stuff you pull out of the air thing, which is here today, gone tomorrow. It's fully documented.
Yeah.
And once it's documented, and that was the whole point with it, what Ingo was doing and what everybody was doing in the beginning, which is once you document how you have gotten this, or you write down what you are perceiving before you know anything about it, and then compare it to the feedback you get, you can't ignore the documentation. You can't say, well, retroactively, you kind of adjusted that a little bit in your mind to make it seem more plausible. No, there it is in black and white. You can't argue with that. Now, but the only problem, and this is the real problem, people are so amazed by this kind of process, they turn around and simply say, no, it's impossible. Yeah, no, it's fraudulent. No, it's, they'll make up a reason because they cannot in their own framework justify how that could work.
Yes, that would make good sense. Unfortunately, we see it all too often, or used to more than we do now in the world of serious UFO studies and any other area of exploration that doesn't fit the normal parameters. What what would somebody studying this new method that you have created be able to take away that they would not from, classic methods?
Well, okay. So I work with a slightly different concept of a target. Sort of more classical stuff is more either location oriented, space-time oriented, or, something like that as a sort of like environmental, well, what's there? Okay. And what I began to work with, because I've done so many different types of sort of psychic work and functions and whatever, is my targets are generally whatever the clients generally have a question. So so that takes me to that location. That's not a space-time location. That is a consciousness location.
Okay.
That's the first thing. Second of all, I include things like synchronicities. I don't understand why nobody ever did that ever in remote viewing, classical, but I include that. And generally, if you're getting a synchronicity on something that you're remote viewing, it's another way that the universe is saying, yeah, you're spot on. I have a different scoring and judging methodology also. And what I was going to say also is in the last few years, what I've been doing, because I see people not only, remotely over Zoom, that kind of thing. I do see people face to face locally. And so what I've started doing is what I'm calling mini remote viewing. So I'll be given a name. I don't know who I'm seeing. That's a lot of them are just walk-ins. And I will, if I have 1 to 2 minutes, that's usually all I have, I will write down on average between 7 and 10 different bits of completely wacky information, anything that's floating through. And then I will verify it with them. Now, to give you one example of,
Please.
And you said, well, this is impossible. Yeah, okay. I had gotten the name of a client. I scribbled down a few things. The client walks in. It was a woman, I think she was a middle-aged woman, I think, if I recall. And so her target questions had to do with, typical things. It was, I think, romance, and I don't know, it was finances or career, something like that. And so we address those. And I say, look, I've written down some really weird things here, but I have learned over the years, if I don't ask or if I don't give information that seems really crazy, that I'll miss out, because usually the crazier it seems to me, the more accurate the information turns out to be, which is counterintuitive. So she said, sure, she was game for that. So I said, look, I wrote down the word NASCAR, and I don't know why I wrote NASCAR. I don't even know what NASCAR is. I know it has something to do with racing, but I don't know what it is. Okay. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, racing. Well, does that mean she's like racing through her life? Or, I figured it was a remotely viewed sort of a metaphor, because a lot of the data, it could be either literal or it could be metaphorical or symbolic. You got to figure it out. And she said, well, my romantic interest, that's his thing, is NASCAR. Oh. And she said, and I worked for NASCAR, and I race cars, and I'm an adrenaline junkie. And I said, now,
Wow.
if you think about that, what are the odds of a woman, out of all the women in the country, even having that set of a background that would have been, really, what is that? So where did I pull that out of? Whatever that is that I'm pulling it from an energy before I ever meet these people. I don't, other than their name, sometimes I don't even know their names, but other than that, I don't know who they are. I don't know anything about their backgrounds. And that certainly would not be a profile that I would have said, well, let me give this a shot. This has got I got good odds on this. No, it was terrible odds.
Nancy, the term synchronicity, which I believe was coined by Carl Jung, for some people just means, just another coincidence, and, kind of a funny one, or one that I remember. And of course, coincidences are just that. Life and the world are full of them. But at a certain point, and it's a tipping point, it's different for all of us, the world of coincidence seems to go beyond any possibility of logic or the odds to such a degree that, again, for some people, they will mystify them, and it'll be this special glowing moment they'll remember. For more analytical people, what we see is a phenomena that perhaps can be measured, but at a certain point takes us into a whole nother area of considerations. I've had certainly a good sized handful of absolutely shattering, impossible in real life terms, in terms of the odds as far as I can calculate in my life, and I'm sure other people do too. How do you see coincidences that function at that level? That, for me, the mantra is every once in a while somebody wins $100 million lottery. Every once in a while somebody wins sure, it could have just landed right there, complete and detailed, impossibly accurate, 1,000 monkeys, 1,000 typewriters, 1,000 years, Hamlet. No, I don't believe that either. But how do you see synchronicity in this spirit that we're talking about?
Okay. And I tend to, my moniker is the skeptical psychic, because I'm skeptical of everything, including myself, all the time. In a good way. I mean, I don't beat it down to the point where I want to make it go away. I just want to not jump to any conclusions.
Right.
And so the whole concept of a synchronicity, yes, it's Jung described it as a meaningful coincidence. There's an acausality an intersection of acausal events that coincide at the same time. And so you think, whoa, what are the odds of that? Because we know that in terms of causation of anything, I mean, you have, as an attorney, when you talk about causation, like a car crash, what caused the car crash? Well, the steering wheel was broken, or the person wasn't looking at the red light. There's a close causation that you say, well, that's what led to this. But that's called in legal language, that's called proximate causation. Because attorneys understand you have proximate, which is nearby causation, and then you got about 1 billion, probably more than 1 billion other causations that if you go back through the waves of time, each causation has its own set of causations. They're infinite. So what is the closest thing that created that causation? So I think you have to be very careful when you're looking at those. And sometimes things are so obscure, so impossible. You said that couldn't possibly happen. But I think if I were to try and figure out or suggest what causes a synchronicity, I think it's because you're able to, at least in the world of remote viewing, travel through different elements of space and time so that you can recognize something that is and will and has been occurring so that you can identify it.
Let me give you a brief example from my life and compress this event a bit and just tell me what you make of it. The second article I ever had published in a magazine was an article on synchronicity. I had read about Jung and I thought, I can keep a synchronicity journal here. And I've got the basics of an article right here. And it began with noticing very simple coincidences. Mm-hmm. New York City resident, walk down that platform just as the subway pulls in. Nice. Mm-hmm. You're walking down the street, you think of somebody's name as a loose piece of newspaper flies by and you step on it, and that name is in the headline. Interesting. And so on. But the more I got involved in it, the more depth and to some degree unnervingness, some of these coincidences were just getting to be double and triple, kind of structures. It all culminated when my publisher, and this is all pre-digital days, who lived in Rhode Island, said he's going to be traveling down to New York. How about we have dinner together? And his girlfriend had asked him to deliver something to a friend who she thought lived in my neighborhood. Well, he comes down to my loft in Chinatown. I make us a nice dinner. And he says, I've now got to find where my girlfriend's friend lives. And he called her and said, well, my friend Peter lives in Chinatown. Here's the phone. And we started to chat. I lived on the 3rd floor of a small loft building, only had one phone. It was in the back, a dial phone, and absentmindedly looking out into the air shaft alleyway behind me. And where do you live? Well, next to the Knickerbocker post office. Oh my gosh, that's around the corner. That's my post office. Well, what a coincidence. Ha ha ha. Meanwhile, I'm noticing there's a shade pulled down on the 3rd floor directly opposite me and an animated figure on the phone. Mm-hmm. And I say, are you on the 3rd floor of your building? And she gets up. I say, pull up your shade. And we wave at each other. Well, we ended up having quite a wild affair for several months, and then she departed New York for a Buddhist retreat. But Howard, the editor, was so completely freaked out by it that he refused to close the article with it, even though it had really happened. Now, my non-mathematical mind immediately goes, besides, what are the odds? How many? And of course, it's a zillion. And your thoughts on that?
I think that's a great story. That's fabulous.
For real.
Well, yeah. I mean, and it's astounding when that happens. It's just amazing. And yeah, what are the odds? That's the other piece of that. So you ought to, I mean, that's what everybody does. What are basically the odds? Well, that's pretty slim, although not impossible, but pretty damn slim. The synchronicity thing that, I was told people about, and you stop me if I've told you this story, had to do with I was working with a client giving, a remote viewing psychic type of a reading on the phone. And he was, I think it was like an elderly type guy. And his target question had to do with, well, he'd been in some traffic accident. When is the attorney going to give him the money that's been held up and given to him? Did I tell you this story by any chance or no?
No.
Okay. So that was my question. However, my psychic brain went off on some other stuff. And so I called him up and I'm giving him my reading on this. And a woman picks up the phone in his house and saying, hello, hello. And he's saying, hello. And I thought, well, this must be maybe a family member, maybe in a different room, different floors, picked up the phone by accident without realizing he's on his phone talking to me. And she said, he says, who is this? And she says, well, who is this? And after a whole lot of confusion, the bottom line was he'd not been able to get through on the phone to his attorney's office. They were refusing all calls. That was the attorney's paralegal. She didn't know. She thought he had called her. He did not. He had been on with me the whole time. I double checked. He didn't have two lines in his house. He didn't have anybody else in his house. He was all by himself. How is it possible, and why, for the first time, and it was several years that they had not spoken to him, that she gets on the phone and thinks that he's called her? Anyway, the next day, the manager of the law firm sent him his check. And he'd been waiting years for this.
Oh, my gosh.
So I think so I'm going to give you another piece of this, which is I do believe that we all are working with certain mental energies. And I do believe that we have the power, depending upon our energies, to actually alter timeframes of when things occur and how they occur. So I think all of us have an ability, even though that sounds very far-fetched, through our energy, our mental energies, to manipulate actual timeframes.
Fascinating. Nancy, at one point, your interest turned to telekinesis. And you actually studied this in Russia. In Russia, or was it still the Soviet Union then? I'm guessing Russia.
It was Russia.
Can you tell us what brought you to that? What kind of program it was? What you went into it thinking, maybe assuming or expecting, and what it was really like? First, can you begin by telling our audience what telekinesis is?
Sure. And people say either telekinesis or psychokinesis. It's the same thing. It's the ability to manipulate matter using only the power of the mind. Yeah. And the typical thing that everybody knows about was what, Uri Geller brought sort of to public awareness. And also he started out in the early remote viewing program in California, but, it was spoon bending, so he just holds and I've watched him do this in his house. You just, you hold a spoon and the spoon just kind of melts. And it sounds impossible. It is impossible. Let's face it. Okay, it's impossible, and yet it happens, which means it's possible, which means we've got to adjust the framework by which we judge these things.
Perfectly stated.
Thank you. Most people don't want to do that. Yeah. And the best thing I was able to do was to take it was during a remote viewing thing that Marty Rosenblatt was doing with the Applied Precognitive Project out in Las Vegas a long time ago. And he said, well, we're going to have a PK party, psychokinesis party. So he dumps a big bag full of spoons and forks and cutlery on the coffee table, tells everybody to grab a piece they want to work on. And I had done this stuff for a long time. So I thought, well, I'm bored with spoons and forks. I don't want to do that anymore. I know that I can do that. He said, and by the way, I went to, Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever they have out there. And I decided I was looking at these pieces of solid steel rebar used for construction. And he said, I think, I've tested this. I know it's completely impossible to bend with human strength. So if anybody gets, daring or whatever, and I figured, okay, what the heck? And the reason why I said that to myself is because I know it is impossible, right? And he's already even stated this. It's impossible. Good. I work with the impossible. And so I picked it up, and within, long story short, within 10 minutes, it melted, and I bent the thing literally in half like this.
Holy shit.
And then it just rehardened. It was really, and I said to myself, what the heck?
Damn.
Because I wasn't doing anything special as far as I know. Why? How could that work? It's impossible. So once you have physical evidence of something that is impossible, then you got to figure out what's the theory behind making that possible. So I got very interested in psychokinesis. I worked with a bunch of scientists for a few years on that and working on some experiments. I then was told about this program that was in Russia.
In Moscow?
No, it was in St. Petersburg.
Oh, boy.
I thought, well, I want to see I know how I do this kind of work. I want to see, what's the Russian technique.
Yeah.
And I was told by the scientists, some of whom had taken this actual course, one of them had actually been over there as opposed to an online thing. So I went over there with a friend of mine who is an aerospace engineer and a professor and brilliant. And we did the training, and it turned out to be essentially a nightmare, which I literally just in the last month have gotten an agreement now with a publisher. And so I've written a book about this. It's going to be published, and it's for the people who've had a little preview on it. People have said it's beyond belief, and it is deeply frightening.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was deeply frightening. And I think
give us an example of how and why?
Because we were essentially imprisoned. And I did not think we were going to get out of there alive. It was very questionable. And the information that I then learned 3-4 years later confirmed everything I ever believed. Yeah. So we were just lucky. But did I learn anything? No. The only thing I learned, because whatever they were teaching, it was bogus. It was, and we were not being taught how to do this. However, one of the things that you do with psychokinesis a lot of times is you'll have like a paper spiral, a thin little paper thing. You'll hang it from a silk thread. You'll put that inside a solid glass sealed container. And then without touching it, without getting any, and you don't want to do heat transfer, you have no air currents, you got nothing going on in there. Yeah, and the thing will start to spin if you're doing this mental process of psychokinesis. And eventually, towards the end of this, what was happening, because we were in such a deep state of, I would say, fear at that point, I believe that's what these things start to move by themselves when I got near them. So I think there's a form of some type of I don't think you can qualify it as emotional energy, but it seems it's a form of an energy that causes matter to do stuff.
Nancy, were you the only two Americans in this training?
We were essentially the only people in this entire institute.
Oh my God.
It was very, very, very strange. Yeah. We did get a chance to meet on 2 occasions, 4 other students. And 2 of them were these young teenage boys who appeared to be zombies.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's a whole other story. So the entire, and I once I did research years later, suddenly everything fell into place, and I began to understand exactly how much danger we were in.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Completely separate, but St. Petersburg, Leningrad, when I visited many years ago, is a beautiful city. Did you have even a chance, a half day, to take in some of St. Petersburg?
I agree with you. I think it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world.
Yeah, it is.
I absolutely loved it. It was gorgeous.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, what's not to like about it? It's just stunning. We had one very short evening, and that was it. That was the sum total of what we were able to do. And running through the subways, we went down to sort of this touristy area, started looking at these amazing churches, had unbelievably fantastic food because we were being starved the rest of the time. And I mean, literally. So, yeah, but we did have that. So, yes, I know it's gorgeous.
It is. One fact stayed in my mind. It was so heavily bombed by the Germans during the war that something like every 7th building was either partially or fully destroyed. And when they were rebuilt, they were all rebuilt with respect for the original architecture. So, you know, you can scan a street of 18th century buildings and it looks right, even though. Isn't it extraordinary the places that pursuit of knowledge on these phenomena can take us?
Yes, it is.
I had another question for you right here. And did you, just to close off this episode, did you have any trouble either entering or exiting Russia for this purpose?
No. Well, not the kind of trouble you're talking about. No, I mean, it was, my flights were ridiculously delayed. And so it was, I had trouble sort of connecting with the people I was supposed to, but no, not like what you're talking about.
Okay. There is a phenomena whereby we seem to, or we actually see what's going to happen before it happens, precognition. Is this an area that you have investigated or had experiences in yourself?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, precognition all the time. I mean, yeah. I don't even know where to start with that.
Let's start with an extreme case in that, again, just random chance. We can make guesses based on almost unconscious logic. But once again, at a certain point, things roll on to be so far beyond the realm of coincidence or of randomness that they can really shake us up. I want to give you one from my life, but I wanted first to hear a particularly memorable one that stays with you of that phenomena.
I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before. And I'm not sure that I've ever consciously thought about that before, which is really strange now that I'm thinking about it. I think it happens to me enough times that I don't even really think about it.
I ask it specifically the way I did because I don't think about it much. And every once in a while, something will happen that will be a gentle tap on the shoulder and kind of function like that. But what I'm about to describe happened probably in the mid-'70s. I, at the time, was working, helping to renovate old loft buildings in the Soho district when there was a building boom on there and galleries going in at extraordinary rates. I was walking west on Broome Street, going to have a beer at Ken and John's Broome Street Bar on Broome Street and West Broadway. And maybe 2 blocks away, I see a limousine pull away. And I walk in, and the whole place is abuzz. Mr. Mick Jagger himself has just left. And, well, do I need to say more? Everybody is in quite a cheerful, lively state. A lot of little cafe tables, pretty packed. I walk in, and I sit at the third one, facing the door, which is a glass door. My friend Jimmy is bartender that day. I turn around, nod at him. There's a guy at the bar who is starting to make a fair amount of noise. Ultimately, he identifies himself as a very loud, very drunken person. And he is gently but forcefully escorted out the door by my friend. All of a sudden, I kind of go into another place. And what I see in my mind is he looks back into the door, then comes around to the side where it's all glass and looks in at all of us. And he's kind of bobbing and weaving a bit, obviously very inebriated. Then he walks back around to the front door and backs off. And I think, I'm looking right at him over 2 other tables and through a glass door. And I think he's not going to do this. And he rushes the door. And the plate glass smashes and he comes falling through, falling onto the person with their back to him at the first cafe table, who falls in toward the second table, which is heading to me. And at the moment, my table starts to go over. I lift my beer. My table goes over. And up until that moment, I had felt, what's going on here? And then kind of come back to reality. It's like, well, what was that about? And then exactly as I describe it, it all plays out perfectly. And I lift my beer as my table goes over. And as a noticeable tension involves everybody in the bar, I relax and think to myself, oh, that's what that was about. That's what I told myself, and it was good enough. That's what that was about. I still think back to that evening and how it was almost like a ballet. It was perfectly choreographed from what I saw in my mind's eye to exactly what happened immediately after. And it's never anything that's troubled me. It's just, oh, that's that experience. Surely there's some point of physics that would allow me to understand it if we understood those laws, but wasn't that interesting? What the heck? Your thoughts on an experience like that?
It's, I'm actually fascinated by your question. I'm fascinated all by the fact that I can't even come up with one, because this happens to me all the time, which means I'm not paying attention to it, which is really weird. I think that's weird. Now, but to go to your point, the stuff playing out, one of this goes back to me sort of being skeptical of everything or thinking about it. And I actually I wrote about this a little bit in my book, Psychic Intuition. There was a guy named Benjamin Libet. He was a scientist. I've forgotten. He's famous. But he famously discovered that we have, I think it's either a 30 or 50 millisecond delay in our consciousness, or let's say our conscious awareness, which means We know something has just happened before we're aware of it. So I think that, so then the awareness comes almost as a, depending on the time frames that you're working with, as I think a form of precognition of about what's about to happen. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think the brain functions that way a little bit. There is a delay, but the delay of data allows us to know that something is happening before we're consciously aware. Now, the other thing that I always find amazing. Now, I've had like precognitive dreams about, let's say, airplane crashes and stuff like that, when there weren't regular airplane crashes going on, and very specifically, the night before kind of thing. And I think that in cases like that, you can't necessarily, you're not close enough to any data or sensory experience that you could say, well, I would have known that. Again, that's one of those things like, what are you doing? You're pulling that out of the air? Where does that come from? Now, I can only say one thing relating to that, and that is that over the years, what I've noticed is that people who have those abilities tend to be focused on certain things. I had a roommate in college who would have precognitive dreams about somebody dying, and she said, and then they would always die.
Oof.
Like within the next day or week or whatever. I said, whatever you do, I'm fine with that. Just never dream about me, please. Which she didn't, to her credit. Okay. I had a client once, a long time ago, who was very interested in, she was tuned into illness as opposed to death. So she could have precognitive information about when somebody was about to become ill. So I think that people have already trajectories set up in their own minds about what are they looking for, even without having an awareness of it, so that they're better able to tap into that stuff that's in the air or whatever that stuff is. And by the way, Mick Jagger, so funny story about Mick Jagger. So I was down on the island of Mystique, which was fabulous way back when. And they had one little cafe on the entire island. It was on the water. And you had to sit there. You're lucky if you got a meal or a drink within 3 hours because they were on totally different time frame. Anyway, so I'm sitting there with my ex, and we had the place to ourselves for hours because we weren't getting served. Who waltzes in but Mick Jagger and his old girlfriend, Jerry Hall, I think, with the long blonde hair.
Oh, my gosh.
Sit right next to us, the table literally back to back with us. There's nobody else in the entire place. So 1 week later, the vacation ends. I'm back in New York City. I'm sitting in this, I got invited by a friend of mine to go to this real hole in the wall place before Chelsea got really glamorous, when it was not glamorous. Okay. So we go to this hole in the wall. There's like a little Italian restaurant with only 10 tables maybe. And I'm in the middle of telling her some fabulous story. And she's saying, huh. And I said, no, I'm telling you the story. There's my punchline. And she's going, huh. And then finally she's so irritated with me, she kicks me in the leg, in the shin. I said, what are you doing? She said, that was Mick Jagger. He literally just walked right by the two of us. Now that was 1 week after I just sat next to him on the other side of the planet.
Thank you, Central Casting.
Yeah.
They're remarkably entertaining. And I'm fine with not knowing the mechanism. It's, again, right now in the world, it's easy to visualize everything as chaos with occasional moments of organization and structure, where in reality, everything is connected, organized, and we are players briefly, occasionally noticing these things or being brought into them, either analytically or filled with wonder. And Somebody had asked me some time back, based on the fact that I've been involved in UFO research for quite a number of years and haven't died. I'm still alive and doing the work. And at a certain point, people think that's really good. Wow, you're still alive and you're doing the work. That's great. But how would you feel if you don't have the answers to the questions you've been seeking for so long when you die? Well, I don't think it's possible. I may not feel anything about it at that point. Or I thought to myself, I'll be fine. I mean, to paraphrase Martin Luther King, it's not just getting to your objective. The journey is the thing. And we're all on the bus together. And I thought how boring life would be if it was stripped of its mysteries, if we knew the answers to every question that we ask. I mean, I'm fine about not knowing the answers to whatever questions I don't know the answers to when I go through the door and figure out what comes next. And I do meet people who are, and I guess when I was younger and more obsessed with the subject and driven, I need these answers and power to the people and declassify everything, as opposed to things are happening as they do. Talking about that group of other intelligences, let's call them aliens, wherever they're from, another space-time dimension, that are involved in interactions with human beings and who communicate seemingly telepathically. How do you see them or their role in our development? And based on all of your studies, how do they integrate into, again, what we laughingly call reality?
Do we laughingly call it that?
Well, again, we know they're out there. We know they interact with us. We study, some of us study the mechanisms or the patterns of their interactions with people. Is this something that anybody has addressed, either with remote viewing, to find out answers to some of these questions? Why are they interested in us? Why do they take us? What is it about us that, we are in relationship about, and we human beings are not sure why?
I think it's really interesting, and of course, that Ingo did his famous remote viewing of, the far side of the moon, I think it was, and his seeing beings, and he talked about that. And I've had some interesting experiences also. I don't think that, well, it became very, very, what's the word? It's kind of trendy, I guess, in the remote viewing field. Like, oh, let's view Mars, let's view the ETs, let's, anything that sounded sort of remotely a little bit like, ooh, let's be like Ingo. If we pick a target like that, we must be really cool.
Sure.
I never did that. I've talked about it. I mean, there was some interesting remote viewing that was done that was very that coincided between Tom McNair and Joe McMoneagle
Yes.
viewing Mars a million years ago, and where they both saw beings there, and it sort of coincided. I thought that was very interesting. Again, I'm going back to the concept, well, if you were going to invent that, how similar would your inventions be? So that's my frame of reference in trying to judge any of this stuff. They had enough unusual things in there. But if you were simply going to say, yeah, well, there are large buildings and pyramids and things, that's so ingrained in the public consciousness at this point. For me, that wouldn't be fabulous. I want something really unusual. So that's what I'm looking for. I haven't made an effort to do that because
Yeah.
I'm concerned, number one, if you're going to do remote viewing, the whole point is feedback. Otherwise, you don't do the target. Because anybody can make up anything. Listen, I have a fabulous creative mind. I can spin unbelievable fantasy things in my head if I want to. That's what artists do. You know that. Yeah, so there has to do remote viewing. If you're trying to test a type of reality, you got to go further than that. And what I do believe, to go back to your original question, which now I've sort of forgotten, but I think that if we're going to understand other entities and communications and, all of that, we have to look at what is our consciousness capable of capturing in terms of a reality, because I know now for a fact that consciousness, depending on our level, will limit our level of reality. Sense actual reality. It will be limited. If you can figure out ways to expand your degree of consciousness, astoundingly, almost magically, actual reality changes. You can see things that you never saw in your life before, and they are real, and there are ways to verify them. But so consciousness and reality correlate. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Often when we're involved in a creative project, we're not interested in talking about it much. But that understood, can you tell us a little bit about the series that you're developing with a British co-writer?
Yeah, it's very exciting, and we're just about now in the phase of starting to present to investors on this. We've got several of it's based on a 2-season, 8-episode season, 2 seasons. We've got several of the first episodes already written. They're extraordinary. And they will take place. I almost don't want to say where they're going to take place, but it's one of the truly magical places in the world. And we are working with not only a group of scientific advisors who I've been able to bring in, because I know an awful lot of scientists who are on the cutting edge of all of these different technologies that most people only dream about. We're getting advice from them. We have people who have witnessed things, and let's say in a very real sense, who are helping us to explore concepts for this. We're going to be combining magic and science, and it's a tremendous story. We've got also some of the top musical people in the world involved in this.
Really?
Yes, it's turning out. It's just going to be massive when we are able to get this out there.
Well,
yeah.
Keep us posted, because I would love to have you back on, and hopefully maybe even your co-author on this once it's accomplished and it's out there.
I would love to. Yeah, for sure.
Very exciting. Can you tell us a bit about your book, How to Talk to an Alien? On the surface, people might just think this is, kind of a flighty idea here, but it's serious. And I think I have the cover. Yes. Can you tell us a bit about this book? It sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, your psychic intuition one, that was the first edition I ever did. I did a second one, which is half the size, which is more concise than that one.
Okay.
Just so you know that. Yeah, How to Talk to an Alien is actually, I wrote it relatively quickly. I'd already done a lot of research, and I thought it was sort of the easy book to read. And I've been told since that it's actually highly analytic, which I have a tendency to go that way anyhow. But yeah, I talk about what's called exolinguistics, which is analyzing different types of reported alien spoken, written, telepathic, different modalities of communication that have been done. And I was looking at it from the point of comparative linguistic analysis. I know about, well, in different degrees, say 5 different languages. So I like language. And I was contacted for 2 years, I believe, my daughter and I, after a major sighting by an ET that spoke in a language I could not understand, and by telephone. And I won't go into that unless you want me to, but that was the whole reason why I wrote this.
Oh, and the same for your daughter? She had a similar experience?
It was simultaneous for 2 years.
How old was she at the time, Nancy?
I think she was 19, pretty sure.
Can I ask you, as a parent, I mean, you're not dealing with a small child here, but still, it's a rather, a special experience to be sharing with, your progeny. How was she about this experience while it was going on? And upon reflection, if I may ask.
When we had our sighting, it was a football field-sized boomerang-shaped
Whoa.
craft. It was massive. It was sitting in the sky above us, covered in 20 to 30 orange lights. It was a giant white orb that came off of one of the wings, went around, went back, and the whole thing either cloaked or dematerialized in 3 phases. That was the sighting, and I won't go into any more detail on that, but she was terrified. She was watching this thing. She's saying, let's go, let's go, let's go. And I said, no, I got to figure out what the heck is this thing? Never seen anything like it in my life.
Mom.
Yeah, mom was right. She was terrified. She thought it was following us on the way back. And I said, no, it is not following us. And then she was as shocked as I was that for 2 years, all of our phone calls between New Jersey and Brooklyn would be interrupted by this very weird, metallic sounding, distorted voice speaking in an unknown language that would prevent us from hearing or talking to each other. We could both hear it. It would hang us up simultaneously. It was just a weird, so yeah, I mean, and I figured, well, who's writing about this? This is a real thing. I know if you go into some of the government programs and if you look to see how they had linguists who were attempting to communicate, they were more than anything, they couldn't figure out the alien languages. They were teaching the aliens how to communicate first in images and then in English.
It's really mind-blowing. I have to say, as deeply involved as I am in this work for the time that I have been, I still find myself once or twice a year, in so many words, thinking to myself, this is actually happening. This is not some confluence of psychological aberrations, or this is really happening. This plethora of kinds of experiences we're talking about, these exchanges between humans and non-humans, and we're doing our best, as a research community to wrap our heads around it. But I think the best of us and the most honest of us still have more questions than answers, and I expect that's probably the way it's going to progress for some time to come, if not always. Nancy, for anybody that's interested in taking classes with you, learning more about you, following your work, the website is theskepticalpsychic.com. Do you have classes starting at regular intervals, or somebody who's listening who would like to, take an entry level or a more advanced remote viewing course with you? Can they just go on your website and that information will be there, or do they need to contact you?
The information, actually, what I'm literally doing right now is launching with 2 colleagues of mine. It's something I've worked on for 3 years. It's a type of remote viewing for people on the autistic spectrum.
That is fascinating. Oh my gosh.
And I had to do it rather differently, and I'm going to see how so anybody's interested in that. I'm just waiting for people to contact me, and if they're expressing an interest, they don't have to commit, but that's what I'm waiting for. I never set up dates for these sessions, for these courses, and it's a 7-week course, 1 hour a week, until I know I can coordinate everybody, because usually there are people either all over the country or all over the globe who are doing these courses. So just get in touch with me.
Great. And a perfect place to have to say we have run out of time. Nancy du Tertre, it is a pleasure having you back on the show. Let us keep in touch, and looking forward to following how the new book goes and this series that you're working on. Stay cool. Again, wonderful seeing you again. My very best to the family. And for the rest of us, let's stay as cool as possible. Stand up for what you believe in, and we'll see you next week.